The Ogaden region of Ethiopia is being called the next Darfur as ethnic Somalis there allege torture and brutality at the hands of the Ethiopian army. Discussing the situation is Fawzia Abdul Qadir, an independent researcher and human rights activist who testified before the US Congress on the situation there. She's in Ottawa, Canada. In the studio with me is Gregory Stanton, the founder and president of Genocide Watch. Dr. Stanton served in the State Department for several years, where he drafted the UN Security Council resolutions creating the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And also with me is Ambassador David Chin, who worked with the US Foreign Service for 37 years, including posting to several embassies around Africa. He's currently adjunct professor at George Washington University. Back to a question from a viewer. Abdullah's on the line from the United Kingdom. Abdullah.
Hello, Reza,
Hi.
and all of the gentlemen who sit in the studio and the lady Fawzia. And my name is Abdullah, and actually I'm calling from UK. First of all, I'm from Somalia, and we know the situation in Africa better than anyone. And we are African, and for example, Ethiopia is running in the dictatorship. The problem is not only in Ogaden, and the problem even Oromo people and the rest of the different
Okay.
you know, different group in the Ethiopia, and they're surviving the under pressure of the dictator of the Ethiopia.
Okay. Abdullah, you raise an interesting point. I'm going to put this to Dr. Gregory Stanton, and also with a live station question that came in here, sir, as we were talking. Marston in the US was in the chat room as we go live saying, is there any way to address the Ogaden issue without addressing the Somalian question as well, or vice versa? And it ties into what Abdullah says about it being a much more wider and complicated issue.
And I think Abdullah is right. The Meles Zenawi dictatorship has gotten worse and worse. It has, in fact, committed genocidal massacres in other parts of Ethiopia. One of them, for example, in Gambela province in 2003, in which at least 1,000 people were massacred. And we also know of massacres in Oromia, against Amharas. There was the massacre after the 2005 election. I mean, it's a dictatorship that is getting more and more into the mode of genocidal killing. So I think there is a real danger here, and that it is going to require a movement to change things in Ethiopia. Now, I personally must say I believe that a violent movement will be counterproductive, because I think it would very much bring down the kind of genocide that we have seen in Darfur.
Well, we've got a call from Amsterdam. Tedros is on the line as well. Tedros, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Thank you, Rizkan. My comment is that I often hear people say Ethiopia is considered by the United States as its best ally to fight terrorism. But it seems very ironic to me that while the Ethiopian dictatorship is the one who is creating radicalism by its actions in Somalia and now in Ogaden, there was no Al-Shabaab before 2006, but Al-Shabaab was a creation of Ethiopian invasion. They don't want to be invaded by Ethiopia. So can someone explain to me why is the United States still considering the regime in Ethiopia as the best ally to fight terrorism, while they are in fact creating more radicalism in the whole?
Okay, actually, I'll put this to Ambassador David Chin, who's here with me as well. And Ambassador, actually, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's been is currently on a trip through Africa. She has warned Eritrea of consequences if it continues to support the Al-Shabaab militia in Somalia as well. We touched on some of the issues about the U.S. role in the region, but there's also a live station question that touches on this from Rich, who's from the U.K., who says, is Ethiopia's hard line on the people of Ogaden region polarizing opinions against them and paving the way to war?
One could certainly make the argument that it is polarizing opinion in the Ogaden, but opinion in the Ogaden has been fairly hostile towards the government in Addis Ababa, whatever government that has been, going back several decades. This is nothing new. One can question the tactics that you use in order to try to deal with the problem in the Ogaden, and if I were in charge of things, I probably would deal with it somewhat differently. But the fact is that there has been a problem of dissidence in the Ogaden for a long time, and the government thinks it's dealing with it with the best way it knows how.
Fawzi Abdul Qadir, a question that's come into us by email, if I could put this to you, please. A viewer wrote in saying, has there ever been stability in the eastern part of Ethiopia? If so, for how long? What have been the casualties of civilians who have no interest in this conflict? And I guess that's one of the issues here. While the ONLF and forces, Ethiopian military forces, fight, the civilians that seem to be the victims here. Is there? I mean, what can be done basically to protect the civilians if it's all-out war?
I think this is where we really need to have the dialogue and the international community intervening, is protecting the civilians. The Somali region in Ethiopia and the Somali question in Ethiopia hasn't really been dealt with in an honest way. Somalis have always had grievances because they have been historically marginalized. It has been escalated by the current regime, and we need to address the human suffering that is occurring. So stability has been really limited in this region because of political marginalization, economic marginalization, and now humanitarian and human rights abuses.
Ms. Fawzi,
so what we need to do is really...
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, what
Yes,
reaction
please.
did you get from the U.S. Congress when you testified in front of the U.S. Congress? Did you get the impression anyone was listening?
They were listening indeed, and Congressman Donald Payne, who sponsored that hearing, was listening, and he has heard. Human Rights Watch testified. Some of the political prisoners who unfortunately are back in prison today testified. What we're dealing with here is a democratization project that got derailed by the current regime. Ethiopia had a shot at becoming a democratic country in 1991, but that project has been derailed by the current regime.
We've got Abdul Wali on the line from London. Abdul Wali, what would you like to ask? Go ahead.
Okay. I want to ask, Dr. David Sheen said the comparison between the situation in Darfur and the situation in the Ogaden is not holding. That is really very, 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 it is a diplomat of the magnitude of Dr. David Sheen to say in a statement like this in a openly is very, very disappointing, really. First of all, historically, the genocide and the situation of the Ogaden has got a long time. In time-wise, it is about centuries.
Okay.
And now the situation is.
Abdul Wali?
Yeah.
Just because we have so little time, let me ask you, Ambassador David Shinn here, that if, as you were saying at the beginning of the program, it's a bit of a confusing situation and there is blame on both sides, that perhaps it's hard to really point the finger at anyone in particular, is there any kind of pressure that could be put on the Ethiopian government to at least rein in any of the parties it's responsible for to try to minimize the situation? The ONLF say that when they've tried to negotiate peace, that it's been used as an opportunity to build up reserves against them, that they're almost too scared to take up any kind of peace issue.
I don't know whether they can be reined in or not, but one can certainly try to encourage a return to what existed back in 1991 when the ONLF was actually part of the government, part of the political process, and it became very disenchanted and left several years later, and I understand the reasons for their disenchantment. But the goal, I think, needs to be to increase development in the Ogaden and Somali region. I would agree that it has been a marginalized region for many decades, both politically and economically. And also you have to give more local autonomy. Where I separate my opinion from most of the Ogadenis is they want independence for the Ogaden. I don't think that's the answer.
You think it's totally unfeasible for any kind of autonomous region?
I think it's infeasible for total independence. But for considerable local autonomy, yes, that's quite feasible.
All right. We've got Betty on the line from Maryland. Betty, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for giving me the chance, but I'm really surprised because the central government in Ethiopia right now is fighting tremendously with all this might terrorism. They're having problems. They're coming through Eritrea, through Somalia to attack people in Ethiopia. I mean, the Ogaden people and the Ethiopian people.
We have so little time. I've got 30 seconds, or less than 30 seconds. I want to get to Dr. Stanton on this and ask: Could the African Union or with the African community itself take more responsibility for controlling what's happening?
I think it could, and I also think that the U.S. government should. over $2 billion a year in aid is given by the U.S., U.K., and other powers, and I think they should make that aid conditional upon access to the Ogaden, let the ICRC back in. Even the U.S. ambassador, when David Shin was ambassador, they wouldn't let him go to all parts of the Ogaden.
Well, I'm afraid, gentlemen, and Ms. Fawzia, we have to end this. I thank you all for taking part in this debate.
Thank you.
Thank you.